members of council, members of the executive management, members of Senate, our inaugurant this afternoon, Professor Simangaliso Kumalo, family and friends of Professor Kumalo, academics and professional staff, students, alumni, our distinguished guests from universities and organizations within South Africa, the African continent, and across the globe. My name is Nhlanhla Mkhize. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of the College of Humanities. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nana Poku, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural lecture of Professor Kumalo. Inaugural lectures provide newly appointed professors an opportunity to showcase their scholarship. Therefore, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, and the Vice Chancellor conveys his congratulations and best wishes to Professor Simangaliso Kumalo. Inaugural lectures form part of the university's public lecture series and may only be presented by newly appointed full professors who have been appointed in academic schools or centers. Inaugural lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university. Each lecture presents an opportunity for the scholar to showcase their scholarship and represents a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion to the rank of full professor. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution to their field, to their academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with their family, friends, mentors, and colleagues. It is my pleasure, therefore, to introduce our Dean and Head of Teaching and Learning, Professor Ruth Hoskins, who will now formally introduce the inaugurant, Professor Simangaliso Kumalo.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mkhize, and welcome to this auspicious occasion. Professor R. Simangaliso Kumalo is a full professor in the discipline of theology in the College of Humanities at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor Kumalo received a Bachelor of Theology Honours degree from the University of Natal, South Africa in 1996, and won the Flowerdale Memorial Award from the Methodist Church of Southern Africa for the best probation student of that year. He obtained his Master's in Theology degree from the University of South Africa in 2001 and doctoral degrees in Theology and Urban Development and Theology and Development, respectively, from the School of Religion and Theology at the University of South Africa, UNISA, and the University of KwaZulu-Natal, respectively. He received the Duke Divinity Scholarship for part of his doctoral studies. Professor Kumalo joined then School of Theology, University of Natal, in 2002 as a lecturer and ascended to the position of full professor in 2021. His research area is practical theology, in particular religion and governance, with emphasis on the interfaith between church and politics. The main focus of his research in religion and governance is the role of communities of faith in social transformation. He has successfully completed the supervision of 14 doctoral and 13 master's students, mentored 4 postdoctoral fellows, and published over 60 research articles in Scopus and ISI index journals published by Springer, Taylor and Francis, Elseviers, de Groote, amongst others. He is currently supervising 10 doctoral students. Professor Kumalo has examined a number of Masters of Theology and PhD theses from the University of Pretoria, University of Stellenbosch, UKZN, University of Zimbabwe, and UNISA. He is a member of the editorial board of the International Journal of Religion and Development. He is a reviewer for more than 30 high-impact factor journals, such as Studia Historica Ecclesiastica, the Stellenbosch Journal of Theology, and the Journal of Theology for Southern Africa. He is a reviewer of Alternation and has guest edited several special issues. Professor Kumalo has been an invited speaker at a number of international conferences and workshops in Norway, Germany, Sweden, the United States, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Rome, Mozambique, and South Africa, amongst other countries. He has had the opportunity of giving invited talks at several universities, such as the University of Cambridge, where he is a fellow of the Wesleyan House College, Vanderbilt University, Duke University, Stellenbosch University, and the University of Pretoria. He was one of the keynote speakers at the 2010 International Conference, which was held at Humboldt University in Berlin in 2010. He was a visiting researcher to Cambridge in 2018. He's a National Research Foundation C-rated scientist since 2021. He's the president of the Society of Practical Theology in Southern Africa. He chaired the Department of Higher Education and Training's panel that evaluated the South African Theological Seminary's doctoral programs in 2021. He was a recipient of the Fellowship of Cambridge University and is a member of both the American and the African Academy of Religions. I invite Professor Kumalo to deliver his inaugural lecture.
Thank you, Professor Hoskins, for the warm introduction. Members of Council, members of Senate.
Prof, please unmute.
Thank you. Members of Council, the VC, Professor Nana Poku, members of Senate, the DVC of our college, Professor Nhlanhla Jerome Kize, fellow deans, professors in the universities, the alumni, students, staff, colleagues from local and overseas, members of the ecumenical community, especially the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, and other denominations and religions and religious bodies that we are part of and we collaborate with. My research assistant, Dr. Kutsai Daruna, and other people who are helping me in my work, my staff in the Center for Constructive Theology, my colleagues from the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics, and many, many more others who are here, and people from the CCT task team and CIHA group. Good afternoon. Thank you for participating in this lecture. Some years ago, one of our colleagues in the School of Religion and Philosophy, who was head of school, attended a meeting of the faculty. And in that faculty meeting, they were discussing the budgets for the library. And he raised his hand with concern that the library budget that was given to the School of Religion and Theology at the time was so limited that they would not be able to buy any books, enough books for students. And one professor raised his hand in protest and said he actually doesn't understand what the colleague was complaining about, because actually the discipline of theology needs only one book that they should be reading. So why was he wanting more money for that? Today's lecture is a response, and also one is looking at the journey of how theology, religion, and the other sibling disciplines are done in the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics, so that we can understand that unlike that one colleague and professor who thought that year in, year out, we concentrate on reading one book, we can discover that we are an institution engaged in real scholarship and intellectual project. The theme, therefore, as you would have seen it, is instrument of perpetual indoctrination or decolonization, discourses and perceptions on religion and theology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. In his influential Summa Theologica, written in 1265 and 1274, Thomas Aquinas described theology as the queen of sciences, Regina Scientiarum. In his view, theology was the most noble of all sciences. This is because theological reflection does not take place by human initiative, since it is intentionally dependent on divinely granted revelation. In fact, from as early as Aristotle, we see traces of the view that theology represents the highest level of academic learning and the summit of knowledge. In the early church, through to the Middle Ages, this view of theology was quite prominent. However, already in the Middle Ages, some thinkers had started to question theology's status as a science. It is during the Enlightenment period, with its empiricism and rationalism, that the queen was stripped of her crown. Empirical sciences and reason became the supreme monarch of the intellectual empire. The natural sciences and mathematics were considered true sciences that operate according to a specific understanding of logic. A true science was regarded as one that collects information based on experiments, employing rational thought processes, making conclusions through deduction, induction, or abduction. Theology, on the other hand, falls outside the scope of what can be established by means of rationality alone. It bases its findings on sources of revelation that are taken as given, not open for scrutiny or verification. Secularization and the waning of religion in public life further spelled disaster for the study of religion and theology. Religion was regarded as a private matter, which could not be an object of serious academic study. This polarity of faith and reason created increasing difficulty for theology to legitimize its place as a science at a university. Secularists argued that religion and theology have no place in secular university or in intellectual life. For example, Richard Dawkins recently argued that theology has no place in the university. It is a vestige of religious world and society which has long since crumbled and been discredited. It is a disservice to a modern research university to include such a subject in the curriculum. Its academic status was viewed as extremely weak, such that it should just be pursued in monasteries, Bible schools, and seminaries. Governments, policymakers, and universities themselves also put religion and theology on the lowest rung on the hierarchy of intellectual disciplines. On the top of the pyramid are natural sciences. Below them are other human sciences in terms of their assigned scientific character. Fast forward to 1994, the year of South Africa's democracy. The situation in modern Europe and America itself reproduced itself. Under the banner of transformation and restructuring, Faculties of theology at several universities were closed or reduced to departments under the school faculties of arts. The university's resources would rather be spent on disciplines that are economically useful and that train students for the workplace. Government was emphasizing the vocational training of professionals, and especially focusing on the technological needs of the nascent society. Theology and other sciences could not contribute in any way to the development of the nation, so it was argued. Just 2 years into democracy, Professor Makgoba suggested that theology should be removed completely from universities or be relegated to a subdiscipline of other faculties because it serves no economic purpose. In similar manner, former President Thabo Mbeki is on record discouraging students from enrolling for biblical studies and by extension theology, which would not make them competitive on the job market except in teaching. The relegation of religion and theology to the periphery was also informed by the new government's aim of transforming the apartheid government's Christian national education policy, whose ghost was still haunting the democratic nation. The apartheid policy favored one brand of Christian faith at the expense of the others. In a multi-religious secular society, the government did not want to be seen to be promoting one religion over others. Thus, the government policy on religion in education spoke of parity of esteem towards religions and other worldviews. It is obvious that the study of theology, that state universities, was out of place in that academic and wider cultural milieu that was seen as undermining the foundation of secular society despite the clear Christian dominance. The end of this made theology and other human sciences unimportant in the eyes of society, the government, and even the universities themselves. Peterson has cautioned that theology would not live under the illusion that its presence at a secular university is an indication of its acceptance. Rather, it is very much possible that it is accommodated at a university, but the university proceeds as if theology does not exist. In many cases, it is tolerated but not accepted. From Queen of the Sciences, integrating and harmonizing the different disciplines, theology has become a marginal discipline relegated to the peripheries of intellectual pursuits, struggling to attract students and whose position in the academia is precarious. This lecture reflects on the relevance of theology and religion at a secular university, and by inference, their sibling disciplines, philosophy, classics, and ethics. It grapples with the question, is there a genuine place for the study of religion and theology in a secular university, such as the University of KwaZulu-Natal? And if so, what should the study of theology in such an environment look like? It also discusses whether theology passes muster as a science. The lecture would not be complete without discussing the decolonization of the SRPC disciplines in order to free them from their colonial vestiges, theological and religious studies. Finally, it looks at the strides that have been made by theologians in the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics to make these disciplines relevant to its context. Theology as a science. Ansley and McLeary famously defined theology as faith-seeking understanding. On his part, Macquarie defined theology as the study which, through participation and in reflection upon a religious faith, seeks to express the content of this faith in the clearest and most coherent language available. Both definitions imply that the faith presupposes by theology can be articulated in a rationally coherent manner. This understanding of theology locates theology within the life of practice of the religious faith concerned. That means theology is undertaken from inside a religious tradition. In similar vein, Wolstervoop argues that theology cannot be disconnected from a faith community because this should happen, theology will end in obscurity. Based on their experiences, faith communities should inquire from theology at a university to explain their convictions and questions found in real life. It cannot function or be real theology unaware to the questions religious people ask and challenges they face. Theology requires such a connection to faith communities in order to stay relevant. Without such a connection to faith communities, theology at universally will cut its own cord of existence. That being said, students study theology in the context of a public university cannot be assumed to bring their faith to the school. This is because theology is an academic study rather than a confessional one. Theology is an academic discipline, and with any other discipline in a modern university, it is subjected to analytical and critical treatment. It can be studied by Christians of any tradition who wish to deepen their understanding of their faith, or by adherents of other faiths, or indeed by agnostics and atheists who are seekers after truth or genuinely concerned to understand what Christians believe and why they believe that. Excuse me. At UKZN, as a secular university, is religiously neutral or diverse in the sense that it possesses any number of religious commitments, or no religious commitment in particular. There is no one religious viewpoint that is taken for granted in this university. At UKZN, we welcome students from many different religions and none. Our academic programs do not presuppose that students hold in depth knowledge of religious traditions before enrolling. We do not enter into the personal beliefs of our students, and we do not see the students' personal belief as fundamental to the educational experience. Theology and religious studies is an academic discipline and approached with critical thinking and logical argument. As in any other academic discipline, students must bring their skills of critical analysis on the aspects of religion that are the object of pure intellectual interest and inquiry. For some, theological studies might assist belief. For others, it can change their beliefs, while for others, they are there just to enjoy it. From an academic perspective, it can be argued that bringing together so fundamentally different perspectives in one faculty may have important epistemic gains, and is therefore in line with the university's primary goal, the production of knowledge and the dissemination of it thereof, insight and understanding. Students who do not identify with the faith understudy, learn about its truths, claims, and traditions in dialogue with those inside. Those outside need not be open to the beliefs of the insiders. However, the outsiders are not peripheral to the doing of theology. It is essential that the insiders come open to the religious and ideological differences of the outsiders in order to allow their hegemonic presuppositions to become interrupted, forcing their theology to be recontextualized and reconceptualized. That way, outsiders become essential participants in developing the tradition, even though they are not participants in the faith under study. Theology thus does not depend on the personal faith of the participants, but on the contribution of those engaged in it to the development of faith. The purpose of the presence of religion at a university is to study religion as part of human behavior in a scientific manner, and not to utilize the public domain of a university as a stage for the advancement of doctrine of a particular religion. In this sense, religion should be contained by the scientific restrictions by tertiary education institutions. Theology as expression of religion should be permitted to contribute to the debate on campus on religion in a social dimension. Thus, it is proper to regard theology as producing a discipline among other disciplines at a secular university. Even though the secular university may not honor theology's status as queen, it must recognize theology's status as furnishing a robust form of knowledge. Theology is epistemologically at a par with natural sciences. Attempts to exclude theology from the secular university is itself not only extremist, but also entirely unjustified. Such a truncation is a serious betrayal of the nature and purpose of the university. Theology should be regarded as a sibling in its relationship with other disciplines in the secular university. On its part, it should respect the autonomy of other disciplines and recognize the disciplinary boundaries. Theological and religious studies must continue to find a natural home in the contemporary public university. Now I get to the question of instrument or indoctrination. One impression that people generally have, and which is also a critique of the study of religion and theology at state universities, which by definition is free from any particular ecclesial basis or ties, is that it is an instrument of indoctrination meant to equip students with the arguments to defend their respective faiths. For that reason, this sectarian area of study is good for nothing and does not in any way contribute positively to societal cohesion or development to be included at a secular university. It is thus not fit for purpose and serves no visible social role. It would rather be taught at seminaries and Bible schools. Indeed, a look at African contexts where theology is not a university subject, but is taught in seminaries where it is entirely under the control of churches and their seminaries, reveals that such a theology is an uncritical, denominational confessional theology, which is of little use and relevance to the broader African society. It is this type of theology that should have no place in the university. By having a theology in a state university, there is the critical space to offer something different. This has been our project in the SRPC, to offer critical and contextual theological studies. We have been so successful that some churches do not want to train their future ministers with us. Contextual and critical theological studies programs should guide the church rather than seminary-like programs where the church guides the university. Religion and theology, as taught at UKZN, is an academic, non-sectarian discipline which is aimed at equipping students with knowledge and skills they can use for their own liberation and that of their societies. It is an academic project, not something that serves the narrow purpose of the church and ministry, which it also does, but is not limited to that. To that end, religion and theology at UKZN has been contextual. The contextual character has been the reputation of UKZN as a center of excellence in the study of theology throughout the world. Our theology engages contextually with society. Its content is informed by the contextual, regional, national, and continental and global community. As Bears notes, theology needs to engage with society, and society needs to engage with theology. Together, addresses concerns. Traditionally, theologians in Africa are trained in a Western form of theologizing. Epistemological preference is given to Western modes of intellectual production, and to be accepted in the global world of academics, one has to do things the Western way. There is no consideration for cultural differences. It is known that for the longest time, academic and public debates centered on theological issues such as immortality, original sin, the conception of birth of Jesus, the resurrection, and many others. Such theological debates did not enable students to respond epistemologically adequately to social problems in new contexts. There should therefore be different ways of doing theology. This means that theology should engage with society according to a different epistemology, which allows theology to engage with social problems in order to change the way society exists. As Vivian Msomi, one of our former colleagues, once noted, theology must adopt a dialogical approach. Not all theologians should be seen as contextual theologies. And when doing theology in Africa, it must be Africa which must inform theology on how to do contextual theology as a site of struggle. In order to remain relevant, theology needs to address issues in local context. This is what the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics has been doing extremely well. From its inception, religion and theology at UKZN was subversive, resisted and critiqued the apartheid system. That is why it was resisted by the white neighbors in Scottsville who didn't want theology to be established at the University of Natal. Some lecturers here were arrested for teaching against the system, and informers were planted in their classrooms. Academics published numerous works critiquing the biblical and religious justification of apartheid. The Bible was used as a tool of resistance to the status quo. The school became a hub of liberation theology and Black theology. No wonder the apartheid government planted agents in the classes to spy on the lecturers and students. With the coming of democracy, focus has shifted from resistance to theology of development. Scholarly activity, teaching and publications focused on how religion and theology can be tools for development in a society that is crying for development. As a discipline named Theology and Development was started, which is still in existence now. This discipline is transdisciplinary, drawing insights from development studies. And when the HIV and AIDS pandemic was wreaking havoc, theology and religion were quick to respond. Volumes were produced by Bible studies developed, conferences and workshops were held in the lecture rooms. Lecturers and students grappled with the addressing misleading theologies of the pandemic as God's retributive judgment on sinful humanity, a sign of the end of the time. The collaboration for HIV and AIDS research and teaching chart program was started to, among others, task develop literature and other resources for faith community to guide them in their response to the pandemic in a life-giving way. One of the flagship centers in the school, and indeed the university, has been the Ujamaa Center for Biblical and Theological Community Development and Research. The center is an interface between socially engaged biblical and theological scholars, organic intellectuals, and local communities of the poor, working class, and marginalized. Together, they use biblical and theological resources for individual and social transformation. The center supports capacity building on development, good governance, on church and civil society levels through theological education to ensure rigorous participation of all citizens in social transformation. Ujamaa is famous for the contextual Bible study methods. The socially engaged biblical scholars and the communities they work with also employ the See, Judge, Act method, where the Bible study processes begins with analysis of the local context and then rereads the Bible to allow the biblical text to speak to the context, judge, and then move to action as we respond to what God is saying, and we act to resolve the situation of oppression and marginalization. Against the background of discrimination of the LGBTQA and plus community, gender-based violence and the gender imbalances that still exist in the church and other broader South African society, the school started the Religion, Gender, Health and Health program to equip students with competency and literacy for gender justice and sexual diversity. Working with communities, the program has transformed dangerous retrogressive cultural practices and religious beliefs. Theology has traditionally had a focus on Protestant churches. With the mushrooming of Pentecostal churches, a phenomenon that religion and theology can no longer afford to ignore, religion and theology at UKZN has also put emphasis on this misunderstood yet attractive brand of Christianity. The past few decades have also seen the renewed emphasis on African instituted churches and the new religious movements. This has been brought about by the reviving of the Center for Constructive Theology. Academics affiliated with the CCT have researched on published on these apparently peripheral forms of religion and Christianity. These fall under the category of new religious movements that remains on the margins, not only of society, but of religion itself. Academics in the school have also put emphasis on the various contemporary concerns that are affecting their communities, such as migration, the ecological crisis, crime, corruption, and the death penalty. These have placed theological debates on issues such as immortality, original sin, the conception, birth of Jesus, resurrection, that dominated theology for the longest time. Medical, ethical issues such as the use of stem cells, cloning, and DNA manipulation are increasingly becoming prominent, and these need theologies and theologians and our Department of Ethics in the school to reflect on this in order to help the church and society at large. What this brief survey has shown is that religion and theology at UKZN has not been an uncritical denominational confessional theology intended to indoctrinate students. It has also refused to be an ivory tower pursuit of the academic elite, irrelevant in ordinary life. Rather, it has been contextual, taking up the challenges and struggles of marginalized groups, playing a transformative role in communities. Academics have structured the curriculum in such a way that the needs of the faith communities and communities of the poor and marginalized are met. This was insisted on by Nada, a former academic in the school, who argued that only when theology manages to transform societies will it count as a real theology. It has been equipping students with critical skills that enable them to critique some life-denying practices and beliefs in both their communities and their broader communities. Theology in the shackles of coloniality. The dominant theological discourse in the department and faculties and religion in South Africa has essentially been Eurocentric. As conceptualized and actualized in praxis, it has all intended purposes remained a manifestation of the missionary stroke colonial project. All education, including theological education, was part and parcel of the colonial setup and shared much of its system of values and many of its tacit assumptions. It was from the beginning an extension of coloniality in marginalizing and disempowering the knowledge systems of indigenous peoples. Canaan Banana saw all colonial education, including theological education, as washing away of African culture and its total replacement by Western values founded on exploitative capitalism. This washing away of African culture is what Bonaventure de Sousa Santos called epistemicide, the colonial murdering of non-Western and indigenous forms of knowledge. Education, as Paul Dominic argues, replicates social structures and so transmit the power and privilege that can attend certain, as well as producing racism, sexism, classism that exclude others. In the same vein, Bongani Mazibuko observes that theological education contributed immensely to the deculturalization, despiritualization, and dehumanization of the African personality. It has persisted well into the 21st century, despite the now common talk of decolonization. Theology in South Africa developed in a close relationship with theology in European countries such as Britain, the Netherlands, and to a lesser extent, Germany. Local developments closely followed developments in Europe with an import of ideas. South African postgraduate students who studied at Western universities, regular research visit to these universities by African scholars and visits to African institutions by Western scholars. The hegemony of Western thought in theology has been so strong that the discipline has been struggling to extricate itself from the shackles of coloniality. From the moment it arrived in Africa, academy with white professors, theology was crafted on a Western template. Now, towards the decolonization of theology. Like every other discipline in South Africa, at UKZN, theology was a product of European colonial history and caught in the colonial matrix of power with Western forms of theology as the blueprint. As a product of the empire, the question it asked is key concept structures and assumption mirrored its origins. Theory and methodology in the study of the discipline was also in line with the colonial origins. Theology at UKZN was a carbon copy of its counterpart at Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and Humboldt, and many, many more other Western institutions. With the consciousness that resulted in the struggles for independence from colonization, indigenization of scholars became aware of the complicity of theology in the wider racist and colonial project, Western hegemony in theology. Thus, the terms Africanization and decolonization slowly entered the academy, but was only fairly recently that the term decolonization has become a household name, not only in theology, but in the entire academy. Thus, calls for decolonizing the curriculum entered the academic stream as of a wider movement combating racist colonial legacies. On our part as theologians, we began to introspect, ask ourselves hard questions about the relevance of theology that we are teaching our students at UKZN and its future. Out of its introspection, we concluded, in the words of Guminda Ki Pambara, that our school had been a key site through which colonization and colonial knowledge in particular is produced, consecrated, institutionalized, and naturalized. We became acutely aware of the colonial distortions of race that have deformed theological education and lamented the structural racism of theological education and predication of white hegemony. We began to question the assumed Western theological Puritanism that is there. Now, decolonizing theology at UKZN. Theologians at UKZN adopted what Mallory Near calls a much softer decolonizing process. Since the process of decolonizing theology began, we have made strides in this regard. Here we highlight some of the efforts that has been made. Firstly, the school was conscious that the literature that had been used for teaching was basically from the West, who researchers and students cite is extremely important in any education. This is because research is not a neutral exercise, but instead a significant site of struggle. Deliberate efforts were made to source literature authored by Africans from African point of view. Although there are not many academics where at the time, decision has been made to make sure that we are available and must make them available by Mambo Press, Acton Publishers, and cluster publications. That literature is made available to our students. Secondly, the school has prioritized dialogical models of teaching because this allows students to inform the content and subject matter that is taught in class as they draw from their experiences of the African faith community and their faith to shape what is taught and learned in class. Such a method allows dialogue and the creation of space for students to be who they are in the process of learning. In this case, education is not done to, but is done with the learners. Thirdly, we have also realized the significance and importance of context in our teaching. Thus, we take seriously the political, social, economic, and religious context in which our students live and in which whose trainee theologians, activists, and ministers will serve after their graduation. Western-baked theology ceases to be a universal blueprint, but located to located questions in located situations. Theology is useful when it engages with the environment. Fourthly, this was necessitated by the fact that the School of Religion and Philosophy at UKZN has always viewed itself as a school that forms and prepares transforming leaders for the church and broader society. Leaders who are attentive to God's ongoing work and who seek to join God and participate in that work. Theology at UKZN also seeks to enable students to learn how to read the places where they will work. This means enabling them to look into their communities. As transformative leaders in the making, we help them to be prophetic and learn to identify and challenge the signs of death and decay in communities. Lastly, a key aspect of decolonizing theology at UKZN stems from the concern with the context is that the methodology that Johannes Kotze also doing theology from the margins. Here we seek to reframe students' thinking to focus on those who are on the margins of society. That is the poor, the exploited, the marginalized, and also refer to those epistemologically excluded. These are our primary interlocutors with whom we are talking and with whom we are collaborating. We read the Bible and do theology. Previously, theology was understood as moving from the center to the margins. In Gerald West's conception, that was reading the Bible for the marginalized rather than reading it with them. What is needed is doing theology with the margins. This is in line with Bongani Mazibuko's argument that colonial theological pedagogy had a vertical top-down approach. In his view, what is needed is theology as horizontal. I jump now to look at the other disciplines. A melting point of sibling disciplines: religion, theology, philosophy, ethics, and classics. The teaching of religion and theology at UKZN happens in the context of a family of related disciplines that lie at the core of humanities. The others are classics, ethics, and philosophy. This came as a result of the reorganization undertaken by UKZN, which resulted in a new college model, which I had the privilege of facilitating as acting dean during the years 2010 to 2011. This gave birth to the new School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics, which we are part of in the College of Humanities. This reconfiguration presented us with a unique opportunity to develop new academic programs that foster a multidisciplinary approach to teaching and learning. Central to our school is a recognition that parallel study of these sibling disciplines leads to a deeper understanding of each. Combining this discipline is fascinating and mutually enhancing. Central to our 5 disciplines is the quest to understand ourselves and our world. We promote investigation into the historical and social understanding of our past, our current social relations, ethical responsibilities, and conceptions of selves. Students navigate this terrain and explore their futures while engaging with the issues in their lives. We are also forward-looking, delving into the likely scenarios for our societies and humanities. The SRPC faculty promotes a diversity of ideas, enables and encourages critical thinking and productive dialogue, and promote informed community engagement. Philosophy, a constantly modern discipline. Philosophy never gets old and it never gets stagnant. While we keep turning back to the philosophers and their invaluable insights, we build upon their questions. And as a society progresses and technology develops, new challenges emerge to the way we live, how we understand the world and ourselves. In philosophy, we engage students in a vibrant exploration of some of the fundamental questions and perennial problems raised by the encounter of human beings with their history, culture, and world. You will engage with questions that have puzzled great thinkers of millennia and are still relevant today. How should we live? What can we really know? Can religious beliefs be justified? And what is their role in society? How can we apply philosophy to real problems facing African continent, such as poverty and poor governance? What can we learn from great African philosophers such as Credo Mutwa, Sheikh Diok, Nontuism Mqetho, and S.E.K. Mkai? Through the study of philosophy and the use of diverse brain ability and to think logically, analytically, and how to accurately and express complex material, both orally and in writing. Ethics, the science of right or wrong. At UKZN, ethics is studied, deals in an interdisciplinary way with behavior, traditions, institutions that seek to foster that which is just to be right and good by society's main value system. Drawing on historical, comparative, philosophical, and scientific insights with a strong emphasis on applied ethical issues. The discipline brings ethical analysis and evaluation on pressing contemporary issues. Ethics is so important in practically all social, cultural, economic, and political spheres to manage activities, fields of inquiry, and professions. Moral quandaries are inevitable in many professions such as law, medicine, business, politics, etc., in which people make important decisions every day that are impacting on others. As a school, we are working towards positioning ourselves as a center of excellence for the study of ethics. One of the seminal contributions that we made in this field was with the publication of Professor Morove's book, Essays on African Ethics, and recently, Professor Beatrice Okeremanu's book on ethics and technology in the context of the 4IR. Classics, 30 years behind other humanities. It is often said that classics is 30 years behind other humanities. It is also accused of being Eurocentric, elitist, inaccessible, white, and male-dominated discipline. Excuse me. Yet as the Roman Empire, Hadrian wrote, almost everything that men have said best has been said in Greek. The classics discipline at UKZN concerns itself with a sustained reflection and an analysis of historical and cultural foundations of modern civilization. It is a gateway to civilization that still has a lot to teach us. In classical studies, we regard scholarship as a dialogue between antiquity and multiple presents, that every present has been shaped by the circumstances of the past. In striving for a better community, we must confront the long-fraught history of appropriations of the ancient world in justifying ideologies and practices of oppression, injustices, hatred, and brutality. The classical studies discipline has been offering students an opportunity to explore the exciting worlds of classical Greece and Rome, the history, art, archaeology, literature, philosophy, science, religion, and many, many more others. Now, furthermore, research has shown that Egyptology and African languages and literature analyzed for centuries provides structured ways to understand language and to internalize and prove syntax, vocabulary, and literary style. In our board meeting recently, we took a brave decision by instructing the staff in classics to Africanize that discipline. And we have a young academic who has committed to build her scholarship around that discipline, having been Africanized. She has just come back from presenting a paper on the Africanization of classics in a conference at the University of Cambridge. It is in such a crucible in which sibling disciplines interact on a daily basis that theology and religion are taught at UKZN. It is in this melting pot of disciplines that we invite students to take an exciting intellectual journey into the philosophical, theological, religious, classical, and ethical worlds of study. In many ways, these disciplines are at the core of everything, everything that we think and do. They are ancient disciplines that are relevant to our current issues and experiences that we face today in our contemporary world. Little wonder that theology and religious studies at UKZN have remained relevant despite all the opposition forces against them. Perhaps I may end this lecture by paraphrasing from the Lord of the Christian faith, Jesus of Nazareth, in his message to Peter, "Blessed art thou, College of Humanities, at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. In thee, I have established the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics. The claims of irrelevancy shall never prevail against it, for the vision of a liberated and decolonized Africa shall be at the center of its intellectual endeavors." I thank you.
It is my pleasure to request Professor Kumalo to take down the screen or to have someone assist him to do so. Okay, sorry, please. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to return to the podium to deliver the vote of thanks. I hereby wish to thank Professor Kumalo for his inspiring lecture. We thank you for recentering theology as one of the premier subjects or disciplines in the academy and society in general. Your lecture reminds us of the preeminent role that was played by the theologians in the establishment of the first universities, some of which were on the African continent. It also reminds us that the early universities, which in fact were monasteries, did not make a radical distinction between the traditional humanities and the hard sciences, but instead subscribed to a complementary view of knowledge, as well as a continuity between the various disciplines. Hence, it was not unusual to find a priest who was a scientist, but who was also a doctor and also pursued subjects such as mathematics and the like. You have also touched briefly on Egyptology or Kemetic studies, and I wish to reassure you that Medunektar, which is in fact the study of the ancient Egyptian languages, is one of the disciplines we seek to introduce at UKZN, and we are looking forward to the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics playing a major role in that regard. Your lecture brings to our attention that the distinction between the technical, scientific, and the socio-moral concerns, which became the hallmark of the scientific revolution and persists in the 21st century, is now in need of a serious reconsideration if we were to establish a just and moral society. You are also challenging us to review our curricula so as to ensure that they continue to be relevant to the challenges of our continent and the globe at large. Thank you for your inspirational lecture. I also wish to thank you for the leadership you continue to play within the college and the university and the community at large. Your persistent efforts at internationalization, which also include engaging knowledge from the vantage position of the South, and that was affirmed in your lecture today, is recognized. We are truly grateful also to your family, and this being Women's Month, to the valiant women in your life who have contributed to you being the person that you are. Today's lecture has been attended by delegates from near and far within UKZN, the province, the country, and internationally. There are too many of them to mention. We thank you all for celebrating Kumalo's successes with us. Finally, I would like to thank Professor Kumalo's colleagues in the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics, and all his mentors locally and internationally, and the faith communities that continue to support him, the school, and the university in various ways. To all of you for attending this lecture, to co-celebrate with Prof. Kumalo, we thank you. Siyabonga kakhulu. This lecture would not have been possible without the sterling professional support that we have received from the Registrar's Office, ably led by Dr. Cleland, and the Corporate Relations team, ably led by Ms. Noma Zondo and her team. Thank you for organizing yet another flawless inaugural lecture. With those words, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all and may you go in peace. Hambani kahle, siyabonga, siyabulela. Thank you.